Hamas, Harakah Muqawamah Muslimin Islamiyah. Harakah gerakan, Muqawamah perlawanan orang Islam, namanya Hamas. Hamas ini punya satu faksi tentara, namanya Brigade Izzuddin Al-Qassam, maka disebut dengan Al-Qassam. Izzuddin Al-Qassam itu siapa? Izzuddin Al-Qassam mazhab fikihnya Syafi'i, akidahnya Asy'ari, tasawufnya Sunni, tarekatnya Imam Abul Hasan Asy-Syadzili. Jangan pernah berharap dengan Wahabi, karena belum ada dalam sejarah Wahabi bisa membebaskan Palestina. Kalau cerita tentang masalah harta, dia yang duitnya paling banyak, selalu di Arabia. Kuwait, berapa banyak duitnya? Tidak bisa berbuat apa-apa.
On October 7th, more than 1,200 Israelis were slaughtered by Hamas terrorists. More than 300 of them were women. Some of these women were murdered twice. The first time, when bloodthirsty Hamas terrorists committed shocking acts of sexual violence against them. They abused Israeli women. They mutilated Israeli women. They raped Israeli women. In certain cases, they did so in front of their loved ones.
היום ידיים מאחורי הגב קשורות, והייתה גופה אחת של אישה שהיה כתם של דם באיבר המין, שאני חשבתי בהתחלה שברח לה מהפחד, שראינו אותה, הבנו שזה בוודאות היה דם.
המון פצעי ירי, גם ירי ממוקד באזור איבר מין לגברים, זה ראינו את זה הרבה. היה להם קטע עם איברי מין, גם לנשים וגם לגברים. אנשים שהגיעו אלינו אזרחיות זה היה, אנחנו ראינו בעיקר או פריטות שדיים או ירי, רק בשדיים, פשוט ירי מקצה של שד לקצה השני.
היא לא לבושה, והוא חותך לה את השד. הוא חותך לה את השד, הוא זורק את זה על הכביש, הם משחקים עם זה, והיא כאילו הולכת כזה ככה עם הראש אחורה.
The second time these women were murdered was when terrorists put a bullet in them. In at least one case, this happened simultaneously. Let that sink in. Today, you will hear abundant evidence of these atrocities. Because, as I said, these women were murdered 2 times. We will not allow for a third time to take place through denial and neglect, a refusal to acknowledge and grieve them.
Distinguished colleagues, members of Congress, women's rights leaders, friends, I want to thank you all for joining us today. Friends, on October 7th, Israel suffered the most brutal massacre since the Holocaust. The atrocities committed by Hamas were more barbaric than ISIS. Some say more cruel and barbaric than the Nazis. Babies were murdered and beheaded. Families were bound together and burnt alive. Children were executed in front of their parents and parents in front of their children. But tragically, Hamas's heinous war crimes and crimes against humanity did not end there. On October 7th, Hamas perpetrated rape and sexual violence, exploiting these unforgivable crimes as weapons of war. These were not merely sick, spur-of-the-moment decisions to defile and mutilate Israeli women and girls, to parade their naked bodies in the street while onlookers cheered. This was premeditated. This was planned. This was instructed. Hamas terrorists were told to commit these acts of sheer evil in order to terrorize us and our families. in order to drive us away from Israel out of fear. This is the enemy that we are facing. An enemy that views reprehensible gender-based violence as part of their genocidal war against Israel. An enemy that proudly weaponizes the cruelest forms of sadism. An enemy that views Israelis not as human beings, but as vermin. This is precisely why such evil must be eradicated. Hamas has no place among humanity. Today, we will hear how women of all ages, from young girls to grandmothers, were not spared. We will hear of violence that is absolutely unthinkable. We will hear the voices of those who can no longer tell their stories, and this is why today's event is of the utmost importance. Sadly, the very international bodies that are supposedly the defenders of all women showed that when it comes to Israelis, indifference is acceptable. To these organizations, Israeli women are not women. The rape of Israelis is not an act of rape. Their silence has been deafening. I even sent photo evidence of Hamas's crimes in 2 separate letters to UN women, which have both been ignored. Only 2 days ago, nearly 2 months after Hamas's massacre, as UN women showed an ounce of recognition, but this is too little, too late. UN women ignored all of the proof and were blind to all the evidence, including video footage of clear testimonies of sexual crimes. Instead of immediately supporting the victims, UN women brazenly suggested that Hamas's gender-based violence be investigated by a blatantly anti-Semitic UN body. This is UN Women's response. So I will state clearly today, the investigation that truly must be carried out is an investigation of UN Women's indifference to the heinous crimes against Israeli women. Although this is heartbreaking, not only for Israelis, but for all women, we must not despair. Look around you. Look at this room. It's overflowing with steadfast leadership and unbreakable values. Every person here is willing to stand up to immorality and vile crimes, to hear the stories of the victims who can no longer tell them, and to amplify their voices worldwide. Despite the short notice, we received overwhelming support for this event. This is an immense source of inspiration, and it empowers women everywhere. If the UN chooses to remain silent in the face of evil, that doesn't mean the world will follow suit. If the top-down approach is broken, the bottom-up approach will prevail. The world will know the truth. We know the truth, and we will make the truth heard. The stories of Israeli women will not be silenced. The truth will prevail, and justice will be brought.
Good afternoon. It's very important that we are all here. It is very important that we are giving voice to the women who were raped and murdered on October 7th. It's very important that we are speaking truth to power at this time and in this place. I'm grateful for the leaders here. I'm grateful to Cheryl for your voice, to take your platform to speak out so loudly and so boldly and so clearly is essential. I'm grateful for the ambassador, for your searing words, your absolute truth, and your unwillingness to accept silence from your colleagues at the UN. I want to thank Sheila and for the National Council of Jewish Women for standing so firm, for refusing to be silenced in this moment, and to bring the world community to bear. When I saw the list of women's rights organizations who have said nothing, I nearly choked. Where is the solidarity for women in this country and in this world to stand up for our mothers, our sisters, and our daughters? The horrific acts committed on October 7th by Hamas are truly indescribable. I've seen much of the raw footage. It takes your breath away in the sheer level of evil it depicts. You can't unsee when you see it, and it haunts you like no other image you could ever see on a movie screen. The barbaric acts are acts beyond what we have seen from ISIS, Al-Qaeda, other horrific terrorist organizations around the globe. Witnessing people trying to behead people through many means is disgusting. Hearing the testimony about what has happened to women, the types of dismemberment, the types of sexual violence to degrade them, to bring fear in their final moments, to bring fear in the eyes of those who had to witness the atrocities, is unspeakable. While it is very hard to tell these stories, while some don't want to show the actual videos and pictures, we must demand it. We have to demand that people see what happened and to know it is truth. We collectively must ensure that the world knows the heinous, horrific, barbaric nature of Hamas's actions. We have to ensure that it is engraved in history for all time, just as when we go to see Yad Vashem and see the memories and the moments and the failures and the cruelty and the horror of what happened during World War II. One of the earliest images that we have been able to see is the attack during the attack was that of Nama Levy. She was being dragged by her hair, her hands tied behind her back, thrown into a truck, blood streaming down her face, streaming down her arms, streaming down her back. Her sweatpants were covered in blood, streaming down her legs, clearly a victim of sexual assault. She was in terror. We've seen photos of bodies of all ages with unspeakable injuries. We've heard testimony of young girls being killed with their pants pulled down and naked, alone, afraid, and in terror. The mountain of evidence, forensic examinations, eyewitness testimonies from survivors and paramedics, video footage from Hamas itself, the words of Hamas declaring victory about the 10 people that he killed to his mother, recorded on his cell phone. It embodies a level of evil we don't see. It's hard to hear. It's hard to witness. Rape's been used as a weapon of war for centuries, a deliberate form of torture that serves to dehumanize and terrorize not just the women, but the entire community. This explains why the atrocities committed on October 7th and the international community's reluctance, even refusal, to condemn or even acknowledge them doesn't just strike fear in the hearts of Israeli women, it strikes fear in the hearts of every woman and girl around the globe. Their bodies are not worth defending. Their humanity is not worth protecting. The world community must do more. It must demand accountability for these intolerable crimes. The United Nations must denounce Hamas as a terrorist organization that uses rape as a weapon of war. The United Nations must live up to its purpose of upholding the principles of international law, and the United Nations must condemn these evil crimes against humanity.
Itu suatu tindakan yang luar biasa, menghargai untuk kebebasan dan juga kemerdekaan. Merencanakan luar biasa rahasianya yang diketahui oleh Israel. Jarang terjadi. Berani, cermat sekali dan caranya luar biasa. Ya.
Dengan adanya serangan Hamas ke daerah Israel, ini menunjukkan bahwa rakyat Palestina tidak pernah mengenal istilah takut. Rakyat Palestina tidak pernah mengenal istilah menyerah. Sudah hampir sekitar 75 tahun. Meskipun rakyat Palestina ditindas dan diberlakukan secara biadab oleh Israel, serta tanah mereka dijarah dan dijajah, namun semangat juang dari rakyat Palestina tidak pernah padam.
Satu hal yang fakta, satu hal yang fix, Israel itu penjajah.
Oke.
Itu dulu tuh. Jadi
Ya.
kita harus mendudukkan bahwa Israel itu penjajah. Bahwa Israel itu adalah penjajah. Dari sudut pandang ini kita jadi bisa tahu bahwasanya apapun yang dilakukan oleh penjajah itu sudah pasti nggak benar.
Iya.
Nah karena itulah apapun yang dilakukan oleh orang yang dijajah itu menjadi perlawanan.
Iya.
Nah maka termasuk kemarin ketika ada Tufanul Aqs itu atau Badai Al-Aqsa itu ketika dilakukan oleh Hamas itu adalah bagian daripada perlawanan.
Kali ini para pejuang Gaza berhasil merengsek masuk ke belakang garis musuh. Jadi ada video beredar bagaimana para pejuang Al-Qassam ini masuk ke pemukiman ilegal Yahudi yang dikuasai oleh Zionis, dan itu nggak pernah sebelumnya masuk, dan mereka berkeliling dengan jeep-jeep mereka, artinya menguasai lokasi itu dengan dikuasai gitu loh. Ini luar biasa sekali. Dan caranya apa? Selain mereka melalui terowongan bawah tanah, terowongan militer dari Gaza tembus ke wilayah pemukiman ilegal Yahudi itu, mereka juga untuk pertama kali menggunakan parasut. Jadi saya nggak harus pikir dari mana itu parasut itu ada itu. Itu videonya beredar tuh. Jadi mereka dari atas parasut mendarat di wilayah pemukiman Zionis Israel.
Mufti pertama yang mendukung kemerdekaan Indonesia adalah Mufti Amin Al-Husaini dari Palestina. Negara pertama yang mengakui kita merdeka adalah Mesir dan Palestina. Sekarang apa yang kita lakukan untuk Palestina? Hai para tentara yang gagah, hai para penguasa, dengan tombol nuklirmu, dengan baju besimu, kau akan diminta tanggung jawab di hadapan Allah Subhanahu wa taala. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Siap bela Palestina. Siap hancurkan Israel. Siap bela Islam. siapa ini Rasulullah.
Just for everyone to listen or to read. Here is the Hamas spokesperson saying that they will continue terrorizing Israel forever, and that they are proud to sacrifice their own population.
إسرائيل دولة لا مقام لها على أرضنا. إحنا الدولة لابد أن نزيلها، لأنه بالفعل هي تعتبر كارثة أمنية وعسكرية وسياسية للأمة العربية والإسلامية، يجب أن تنتهي. لذلك إحنا لا نخجل من نقول ذلك بكل قوة، إنه إسرائيل لازم نأدبها، وحنأدبها مرة ثانية وثالثة، ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الأقصى أول مرة، لا حتكون ثانية وثالثة ورابعة، لأنه إحنا لدينا إصرار ولدينا قرار ولدينا إمكانيات أن نقاتل نعم. ونحارب، لكن كما قلت لك بدنا ندفع ثمن. نعم إحنا مستعدين، معلش بدي أقول لك بشكل واضح، إحنا اسمنا شعب الشهداء ونفخر أن نقدم شهداء. لا يجب أن ننتهي.
أن ينتهي وين؟ بقطاع غزة؟
ينتهي إلى لا، بتكلم عنه كل أراضي فلسطين.
كل الأراضي الفلسطينية، يعني زوال طبعا. إسرائيل؟
طبعا. وجود إسرائيل غير منطقي. وجود إسرائيل هو اللي بخلق كل هذه الآلام والعذابات والدموع والدماء، هي إسرائيل مش إحنا. إحنا ضحية الاحتلال، نقطة وآخر السطر. لذلك ما حدا يلومنا، إحنا شو اللي بنعمله في 7 أكتوبر، في 10 أكتوبر، في مليون أكتوبر، إحنا اللي بنعمل مبرر. It is justified، مبرر.